when we talk about climate these days is that it's not one issue. It's a massive component of all the critical issues that make up society. That if a country like Saudi Arabia or now the US they have huge interests in making money out of fossil fuels. So it's very sad that the COP wasn't able to be the leader in terms of organizing structural policy. They're just extracting our wealth. They're sucking it up, and they don't really give a damn about the environment. More vulnerable nations would have access to, or developing nations would have access to cheap, reliable energy. If you see that the problems now are accelerating
Mhm.
against us, they're getting worse faster. The Earth is more sensitive to temperature.
Mhm.
Forget 1.5, we're going up, and it's much more towards 3 degrees. We're not going back. We're entering a period where we are in a period of massive destabilization, and we've got to figure out fast how we're going to keep as many of us alive. Northwest Spain right now, and along the waterfront here, um, all the wildlife is dying in the water because of the increased rainfall is desalinating this coastline. How resilient are we to near-term shocks? And I would look at food and energy as a starting point, but also housing and infrastructure.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Science Talk. I'm your host, Dr. Mohammed Itefak. Today, I am interviewing somebody who interview people. I'm fascinated by his work. I'm very lucky to have his time and expertise today. He himself hosts a YouTube channel, ClimateGenn, Nick Bree's ClimateGenn YouTube channel. I would put that in description. And he has conducted I haven't counted, but I imagine maybe over 100 interviews over the last kind of more than a decade since 2009 to talk with experts all around the world from Australia to Europe to the United States. And I thought it's a great idea to have some last episodes of 2025 to invite him to talk about his experience on YouTube and climate change, talking about that, and also having guests, renowned climate scientists all over the world. So, Nick, welcome to Science Talk, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. It's very nice to meet you and speak with you.
Very nice to meet you. First time we're interacting. I'm a huge fan of your work. We're talking about off the camera, if we can call it. So, how's it everything going, personally, professionally?
Um, Pretty good. I mean, round the clock. Very, very, very busy with podcasting, with interviews for other projects. I've got a stack of writing projects that are looking at me rather angrily because they're all behind schedule. So, yeah, very good in a busy way. But yeah, I don't know how much time I'll get off this Christmas.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of time, and I think sometimes people don't maybe realize on the other side that how much preparation and time it takes to get these episodes out. And you've been doing fantastic work. I'm a huge fan. So, how's the overall YouTube experience? And tell a little bit about. I know you're a journalist from a background, but tell a little bit more about your background in terms of starting YouTube and talking about climate.
Well, I think I started around 2008, 2009, um, after reading a book by James Lovelock, who is famous for Gaia theory. And I teamed up with a friend of mine who's makes TV programs and films, feature films and stuff. And we started making a film with Jim, but it was cancelled largely because of the Climategate scandal. And that really meant that we couldn't do it. So we had sunk some money into it, but it didn't go anywhere. But one of the things I really thought about at the time is that if this is real, of what Lovelock was saying is real, then at some point it's going to collide with all my other plans. And I work in the art industry and I work in the wine world as well. And I thought, blimey, those trajectories at some point all intersect. So I started interviewing other scientists, and in a sort of very haphazard way, I'd hire someone, or some people would volunteer to come and help. And we had just put them on my YouTube channel, and that's really how it started back then. It was a little bit haphazard. The podcasting side of it didn't really start till later, um, especially during the lockdown when it was a sort of formalized into a podcast.
Mhm. So is it so you mentioned a little bit about ClimateGate. Can you remind our audience what was it?
Well, it was really a scandal and one of the early climate denial projects where they took a load of data and hacked into emails from, I think it was the University of East Anglia in the UK, and then started insinuating that they were overhyping climate change. And that created a sort of a stigma about talking about climate change. So all of the media, mainstream media in the UK, basically shut down. You weren't get all programming was stopped. I even went to a meeting in the House of Commons where they had the factual commissioning editors all lined up on a panel, and they were all saying we will not show a climate change film, and one guy was saying, oh well, we'll try and smuggle it in with nature programs, but that's about it. And you just saw this kind of triumph of the fossil fuel industry in the UK over the media for pretty much a decade. Obviously, there was some hype around COP21 in Paris,
Mhm.
but largely, I mean, it didn't really get any airtime for quite a long time. Yeah.
And it's interesting because there's the same, and now the same UK had a national emergency briefing where they invited, dozens or maybe hundreds of scientists to talk about every as single aspect of climate change, national security to health to all those other issues, and realizing that maybe it's getting too much, right? And it's interesting that at that time they're like, oh, maybe it's still not as urgent as they're saying, but now they're saying like maybe we're getting too late. So now 2025, you also attended a couple of COPs. Do you go now or you stopped going?
Well, I've been to nine from COP21 to COP29. I didn't go this year mainly because I've been so overwrought with work, and it was a long way to go there and be stressed out about
That's
stuff I
true.
wasn't doing back here. So I didn't go this year. Maybe go next year if it's in Turkey. That's I can probably get there one way or another. So um, yeah, the COPs. Unfortunately, I mean, we can talk about COP30 for a bit if you want, but
Yeah,
I think the problem is that we really haven't succeeded at bringing down emissions. They went up again this year,
this year,
and
yeah.
yeah, emissions is not really the bulk of the problem. Emissions is a massive problem,
Hmm.
but it's the foreplay to the real problem, which is atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases.
Hmm.
So since Paris, I think we've added something like 500 billion tons of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. So fundamentally, the system has failed, and we get these little tiny sort of sideshow wins. I think this year it's the just transition mechanism, which has been set up in verbal terms, but
Hmm.
that's one of these small wins that comes out of it, and every year there's something like that, but they don't really amount to much over the longer term. So we've got a massive problem with the cops being totally disconnected. And I think you mentioned the national emergency briefing in the
Hmm.
UK, which I went to. And what was amazing there is that you had fantastic scientists
Hmm.
briefing, I think there's about 1,500 people in the room,
Wow.
but on all different sectors. And I think it's really important that when we talk about climate these days, is that it's not one issue, it's a massive component of all the critical issues
Hmm.
that make up society and that society has to care about. So you had agriculture, and you had emissions reduction, and fossil fuels and all that, and the energy system. Then you had health, and then you had national security, and you had nature and biodiversity. So once you break all these down, you can see how they start to impact every aspect of your life. and things that you do genuinely care about, whereas climate change is actually quite abstract as an umbrella concept. But once you look at it into go into healthcare or you go into national security, you start to see how big and sort of pervasive the problem is. And that was one thing that really came out of this national emergency briefing was that a lot of people there were amazed at how serious it was in the high resolution detail. And I think we need more of that. We need more of that education coming from scientists in specific areas to policymakers, business leaders, leaders across the public sector, private sector, and civil society. And I would say that we might get more out of the COPs if we had a better briefed local regional society. So if civil society in the UK knew much more about our own vulnerabilities to climate change, then we would empower and put pressure on our politicians as they fly off to the COP
Mhm.
to represent us on the international stage. At the moment, it's you see Miliband and Keir Starmer going off to the COP, and you're thinking they're kind of on their own, really, because no one cares back in the UK. No one's really talking about it. It's almost invisible. And you see poor old Miliband there trying to say, well, I'm really passionate about this, and what I say here really matters. But in effect, the British public are completely over there. They're miles away from the conversation at the COP. And I think that's a huge problem. I think these national emergency briefings could be going on everywhere, around every different country has their own set of challenges and so on.
Absolutely. Yeah, so a couple of things you mentioned. Absolutely, climate change is a very dynamic and a bigger problem, which is affecting every single sector you can name it. Um, And I hope there won't be another scandal out of these briefings again about UK. But so you've been attending COPs for 9 years. What was the main difference each year? Because I was shocked, honestly, when I talked with Zipporah Berman. You have talked with her before that the COP did not ever mention about the word fossil fuel in the like the last draft of what comes out as outcome, which is the strangest thing ever. These are the people who are scientists, civil societies, politicians, fossil fuel lobbyists, everybody talking, and the biggest elephant in the room, they're not talking about it. And still, like, on the other hand, when I talked with another, scientist recently mentioned that the UN, for example, does not, or IPCC does not kind of hold countries accountable to stop producing oil. So if we're not asking to stop producing oil or fossil fuel, and we're not talking about fossil fuel, then what kind of progress are we talking about on climate change in the coming years? So, how the cops were different? Were they different at all, or do we still like 10, 15,000 people go, emit a lot of emissions through these flights and just like and talk, have some meetings, and these fossil fuel lobbyists come there. They have their own agenda, talk, eat, take photo shoots, and like kind of having some headlines in the global news again, and then go back home.
Yeah, I how we characterize the cops is interesting. I think they are fantastic for galvanizing the climate movement. So if you work in climate change and whatever, I mean, it's same like we were saying before, it's in every aspect. So there are people there covering so many different things, as from indigenous peoples to nature to law to you name it, it's all there. And it's very galvanizing to see all this going on. You realize that your sort of anxiety goes down because you're not alone. There are people who passionately care. They all are trying to do the right thing, trying to get the message across. It's slightly disconcerting that the biggest group in there are actually the fossil fuel lobbyists. That's bad, obviously. The um, the other side of it, I think, is that it's the only time of the year when the media really show up at all,
Yes.
if at all. Um, yeah, and this issue with the fossil fuel lobbyists and the fact that the word doesn't show up, that is kind of because of the model of how the UNFCCC works on this sort of consensus model with armies of lawyers and advisors. And let's face it, if a country like Saudi Arabia or now the US, they have huge interests in making money out of fossil fuels,
Mhm.
Russia, so on. So you're asking them to not do that anymore. And they're thinking, well, we can game this system, and we're going to game this system.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's probably one of the big problems we've got to solve is how do you take away something which is vital to someone else's economy?
Yeah.
It hasn't worked yet in 30
Mhm.
years because if you go back even, 20 years, 2005 in the UK, it's the Blair government. They weren't talking about climate change. They were talking about war in the Middle East. It was a, you know, much more fossil fuel
Mm.
centric era. Um, so it's been 30 years of failure, and it's amazing that the cops themselves are still going. And what we're seeing now is this forum is the only forum that countries, especially climate vulnerable nations, have to talk to other bigger nations about the problems they're facing from climate change. So it is important as a forum for that. At the same time, events outside of the COP are overtaking the progress inside the COP. And
Mm.
you're from Pakistan.
Mhm.
The rollout of solar in Pakistan is going sort of vertical in growth.
Yeah.
And these kinds of things in Africa is happening. China is revolutionizing the clean energy space. America's receding on that,
Mhm.
on that challenge. But the rest of the world is sort of seeing the financial benefit, and that's overtaking. So it's very sad that the COP wasn't able to be the leader in terms of organizing structural policy, but we're going round it in just general progress ways. But it's still, I mean, it's incremental changes when the problem is exponential, and
Yeah.
that's our biggest problem,
Absolutely.
really.
And I think on the other hand, it's too big. The problem is too big. Hundreds of countries are involved. And when something gets that scale, honestly, it's destined to fail most likely because it's so big, so complicated, too many stakeholders. And these days, it's hard to get two people in the room to agree on something, right? So it's like kind of bringing everybody on the table or with the same agenda. It's gonna be exponentially like difficult to get to. It's not just like COP wants to fail, but I think I would give a little bit margin that it's so big, it's too complicated, and it's too many stakes involved from these countries and companies, of course, and that makes it harder to achieve something quickly. Of course, it's been 30 years and still emissions are going up, and that is a failure absolutely every year. Do you see the peak of emission in the coming years, like the fossil fuel production would go low ultimately due to renewable technologies and all that?
Well, I thought we were coming close to it in terms of electrification.
Hmm.
Um, it makes sense. The future is in electrification, and all the countries, I think the EU today said that they're scrapping their ban on petrol engines, combustion engines by 2035, I think it was. But eventually, it's ridiculous to think that we'll still be doing that. All it is now is it's a money-making scheme.
Hmm.
These are zombie industries that are extracting money from society. We should be moving into this era of cheap, low-cost renewable energy. It just makes sense for everybody. It would be a better world. It would have better air. We would have a more resilient systems. You couldn't have war in Russia or Russia invading countries and driving the price of oil up and so on. More vulnerable nations would have access to, or developing nations would have access to cheap, reliable energy. There's so much, to benefit from and so little to gain from, except for the few who have people in power in all places like the UK or, Norway or US. You can go around the world and pick any, these countries where you have the fossil fuel producers and they're just extracting our wealth. They're sucking it up, and they don't really give a damn about the environment and they don't care about the future. They don't care about their own children. I mean, these are quite sick individuals, really.
Yeah. In 2025, I think there have been so many reports, out, and these reports are not very encouraging, other than the Amber Energy report, which shows that the like a huge reduction in cost and also how exponentially these renewable technologies and energy sources are going up. But at the same time, 2025, we see coral reefs tipping point. We're seeing, Amazon reports. We're seeing, emission gap production reports and many other reports which are not showing a good picture at all about the planet. It's December 2025. This interview might go up on this year or early next year. What do you make of, how would you characterize 2025 in terms of climate?
In terms of climate, well, there's been a big awakening, I think, in Europe, and that's really to do with this whole AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, the currents that we now know are going to start shutting down in about 20 odd years. And although it's a long process to
Process.
shut down completely, it shows that we're not immune. And you know, there is no hiding place from this catastrophe. And our agricultural systems are already under threat. The IUCN have just put out a report on the Mediterranean of how business as usual agriculture using pesticides and chemicals and synthetic products and overgrazing are pretty much destroying the um, the the Mediterranean ecosystem. So it's 1 in 4 species is at risk, is critically at risk of extinction. So, we've got real problems that in this year characterized in 2025 is we're going in the wrong direction is what seems to have come out of this year. We know who the bad guys are now because they're not even hiding it. The US under the federal government has gone rogue, and the states themselves did show up at the COP, for example, and there's a huge amount of emissions that are out of the reach of the federal government, which probably don't get talked about enough, which are staying within the original sort of Paris framework.
Mhm.
So I think 2025 is kind of the gloves are off in a way. I think we know that we're sailing in, well, sailing into the somewhere in the storm because many people are dying right now. And we've got to choose what sort of future, how we're going to be as a species. Are we going to be aggressive, violent, killing machines, or are we going to be progressive, evolved, thoughtful, caring creatures? I think that's something that's really taken effect this year. I think even Trump has also shown what the dark side really looks like of this tortured inner world of humans
Yeah.
who are doing the wrong thing.
And it's just not about us, there are millions of species in the ecosystem which depends on these, systems. If they collapse, they would go extinct. There's no doubt about that. And a lot of conservation biology and, experts talk about those issues. And of course, I agree that 2025 is not showing a great picture. It's just kind of, another bad year for climate. But moving forward, there are a lot of discussions on 3C, because we have reached, this is the third year consecutive 1.5, we're still hanging in between 1.4 to 1.6. And there's a lot of people saying that, people meaning scientists, are telling us from the data that it might go 2.5 to 3 degree by 2050, 2060, or in the years to come, but definitely before 2100. So when you talk with these experts, what you are getting, what you are like kind of seeing, what they see, where we are heading. Is it because 1.5 and literally every single day there's a disaster somewhere? Every single day, Indonesia to Southeast Asia, and now Saudi Arabia, and in Brazil to Europe to Asia to Africa, everywhere. You see videos and you see all images of devastation. What is 3C gonna look like for, like these communities and the countries, and especially with vulnerable countries, Asia, Africa, Middle East? where the heat is already reaching 120 Fahrenheit, or around 50 to 60 degrees Celsius in the summer. Thousands of people die each year. Air pollution is the worst ever in South Asia, especially. Air quality is so bad. So it's just kind of already we are seeing a lot of deaths and destruction, and it's kind of, doing a huge damage to GDPs across the world. And one of the reports show, for example, in South Asia, they're going to be spending their 30 to 40% of GDP on adaptation or mitigation. And there's no other way to do things. So when we talk about 2.5 to 3C, what do you have learned from these experts on that? And is there like kind of grand awakening that we can still stay below 3? Because some people say 1.5 was too ambitious in Paris Agreement. They knew that is they're gonna reach that, and it was foolish to set that threshold. But now we are setting another threshold for ourselves.
Well, there's a late scientist. He passed away a couple of years ago from Bangladesh, Salim ul Haq,
Yes,
and
yes, he was great, great
he,
human being.
yeah, fantastic. And he was saying um, back then that the vulnerable nations pushed for 1.5 because that was kind of, in real terms, that's the limit for many of their survivals. Once you go over that, they can't really build enough resilience to
Mhm,
survive the onslaught of impacts, of extreme impacts. And I went to the Helsinki event recently, and James Hansen gave a
yes,
presentation,
I
and
watched that video. Yes.
yeah, and what he's basically saying is that once you once you put so much greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, you have an energy imbalance. The system has to reach a new
Mhm,
equilibrium, and we're not there yet. That means forget 1.5, we're going up, and it's much more towards 3
mhm,
degrees. And I think we're using this term overshoot now a lot.
mhm. Yes.
And at the beginning of the COP, the UN Secretary General Guterres said in one of his opening addresses, it was online, that we're going to temporarily overshoot 1.5 degrees. And I think that's disingenuous because it's implying that we've got something here, some dial, and we're going to
Mhm.
dial it back. And we're not
You're
because we
not.
have no means to do that. And even if we reduce emissions now, we're not bringing down our atmospheric concentrations. We're just
Mhm.
reducing the amount we put in, not bringing down the overall
Yeah.
quantity. And I don't think a lot of people really realize this. I don't think they realize how bad that situation is. And I don't think from everyone I've spoken to, and this has been for years, I
Mhm.
mean, I don't think we can really survive. Our civilization is robust enough to survive over 2 to 2.5. I just can't see it. If you see the problems now are accelerating
Mhm.
against us, they're getting worse
Yeah.
faster. The Earth is more sensitive to temperature
Mhm.
than we realized. So to think that you're going to double that temperature against an accelerating system doesn't seem to add up for me at all. I can see the agricultural collapse. We'll probably have a famine in Northern Europe, God knows what else around the world, a lot of conflict.
Mhm.
The next episode I'm putting live is with the Climate Psychology Alliance, but we're talking about this armed lifeboat, and
Mhm.
it's both metaphorical and real because we have these situations in the Mediterranean where thousands of people are dying, and yet we're building our societies like this as well. Immigration is becoming, this thing that everyone's scared of, and
Yes.
we're demonizing these
Mhm.
people who are desperate and so on. So I think that we really need to get a handle on how we're going to navigate this. I've always I've done a lot of interviews on geoengineering and solar radiation
Yes.
management. I've never really been an advocate. I just wanted to hear the
Mhm.
best cases for, the best cases
Of course.
against,
Mhm.
always supportive of research. But now I would like to see billions invested in research. I think it's so serious that our whole economies, our civilization, we don't have that many options at the moment. So if aerosols, which are proven to regulate temperature on the planet, if they can play a role, then we need to invest billions in trying to figure out, is it safe? Is it going to do anything that could
Anything at
save us?
all. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the few things we've got going for us at the moment is that there's a lot of smart people out there who are already looking into it, but they probably need more resources and more experimentation. But I think we should be doing that.
Yeah, that's
Um,
a good segue to another discussion point I wanted to ask. There are a lot of solution-oriented approaches, but like how to extract CO2 from the atmosphere. But when I talked with a few people, but you have talked way more people than I have, it's extremely complicated. It's not cheap. You have to rely on a lot of energy again. Um, and there are no viable, like at least they say politically viable or technologically viable solutions right now. And we are still talking about these potential solutions, and we don't know how they're gonna pan out, in the future until we start doing them, right? So, and there is no kind of concrete kind of plan from any country or company to do that. But like when you talk about with these scientists, who are some technologists or people who have some sort of solutions how to restore our climate back to where it should be. Are there really some tangible solutions we having other than geoengineering or solar radiation? Is there like another method are they proposing which can work? I mean, it's hard to tell because these are complicated experiments and we are like messing with the nature, which can be scary as hell. But like on the other hand, we have to do something. We can't just sit back and relax and see like to see it happens, right?
well, I think the idea of going back is kind of a false notion because I don't think we're going to be able to go back
Mhm.
to where we've come from in terms of the planet and where it is. We've destroyed so much.
But they always
Um,
tell us go back where you came from. But can we tell the CO2, CO2 to tell like go back where you came from?
well, in terms of the carbon cycle, regrowing biomass on land and in the oceans is probably the best thing we could do.
Mhm.
That would be a huge Earth restoration project. It'd probably be a more worthwhile project than building up our militaries and so on. I mean, I'm in northwest Spain right now, and along the waterfront here, um, all the wildlife is dying in the water because of the increased rainfall is desalinating this coastline. It's a very straightforward climate change cascade. And now they just announced that there's a naval base just down the road here. That's going to be developed and expanded beyond all recognition as a NATO base. And so that's kind of game over for the ecosystems
Mhm.
in this area. And that's kind of a small scale example of what's going on everywhere. That we're ever presented with a choice to do the right thing or the wrong thing,
Mhm.
we do the wrong thing. And we need to start making the right choices. So, should we build a NATO naval base or should we restore all of the coastal ecosystems and look at ways to stop the rainfall coming into the rear? So, build reservoirs or whatever. Or do we look at ways, can we cool the Atlantic to stop the evaporation that stops that? That could be a geoengineering task. But I think we're not going back. We're entering a period where we are in a period of massive destabilization, and we've got to figure out fast how we're going to keep as many of us alive, fed, dry, warm, and in a civilization and society that we want to live in, that is not full of hatred, fear, and
Yeah.
so on. Our social problems are destroying us.
And the more we see these climate impacts, the more we see the extreme hate and xenophobia and debate around immigration and fascism and authoritarianism and control devices and all that. I think the more we see the extreme heat and more extreme flooding, the more these countries are going to be thinking about resources extraction, and that's going to lead to more conflicts. Absolutely. So, what are some of the more of a lighter note question? What are some of the more work you're going to be doing on ClimateGenn on YouTube? What are some of the potential areas you're exploring, and what are some of the episodes which are coming out?
Of episodes in the pipeline. I'm doing a roundup of 2025 with David Spratt, who I saw you've
Mhm.
had on
Yes,
your
yes.
show as well, and the Climate Psychology Alliance will go live today, which is it's quite a staring into abyss
Mhm,
episode on the psychology and the rise of populism and so on. But it's cyclical as well. Looking
mhm,
at it over a longer term, you think we had the world wars in the last century. So, how have those experiences informed and also shaped what we're going through now? Um, so I want to keep looking at those kinds of issues, the science as it emerges. Next year, I'm going to be writing another book. Well, I've started. I'm quite a way into it, with the and it encompasses this idea of a bit like we were talking about with the national emergency
mhm,
briefing, is going into certain areas that connect to aspects of society and then looking at how climate change is upending
mhm,
that section of society. Who's the most vulnerable? Usually they're normal people going about their jobs, but when they try and figure out what's going on, they go to the media or they go to
mhm.
where
Yes.
they go to get information, and they
Yeah.
get a completely nonsense version
Mhm.
of why their predicament is like it is. And you know, I'm very interested in those sort of dynamics at a local level. So that's kind of what I want to focus on a bit more. I would like to see more national emergency briefings. So I'll be speaking hopefully with the organizers again of
Mhm.
um, that sort of initiative, which is I think galvanizing the local to have
Oh,
a
absolutely.
bigger international conversation
Mhm.
is important. I think that's a
Yeah.
way for 2026.
Yeah, I would say you taking another book task, which is a big undertaking. Good luck with the book writing process. Of course, it's gonna take a significant amount of time. And so my last question would be to you is, what is something you think we are not spending as much time as a society or a scientific community talking about climate, which we should be talking more?
It really comes back to this resilience. How resilient are we to near-term shocks? And I would look at food and energy as a starting point, but also housing and infrastructure.
Mm.
Uh, Britain is an island, and islands have multiple points of
Yeah.
vulnerability from tidal, low-lying land.
Mhm.
You're in the northern hemisphere near the Atlantic, so you're getting these huge weather systems barreling in, which are really causing flooding events now, testing infrastructure. So if you put the science into the policy making realm and you start to say, well, how does this play out on these trajectories? What are the scenarios that we can look at? You start to realize that we've got a lot of work to do to be resilient. And I think that's where we should focus. What happens if there's a food production collapse in the place where we currently get all our food production?
Mm.
And you could apply that to any nation, really. It's just how resilient are we, really?
Yeah, that's a big question for us to think about as a humanity, as a society. But with that, thank you so much again for coming on Science Talk. I appreciate that. I will put the link of your work and your channel, and I will run to collaboration as well. But I will put your website. You have a really cool website, and also the YouTube channel link in the description below, so people can go and check out more of your work. Thank you so much.